Today we're going to talk about new hires and the risk with new employees and what to do with them. When it comes to new hires and new employees, when you look at your new employee uh, group, when we looked at our data, we have around 41.37% of our claims come from those employees within the first year, which when you think about that, that's pretty significant. Just one group of employee base is causing almost half of our claims. Uh, and as Don Brown said, an incident is just the tip of the iceberg, a sign of a much larger problem below the surface. So when you guys think about that with your employees and where those injuries are occurring, sometimes we only scratch that surface when we're doing those incident investigations and we don't dig deeper. Uh, Again, the problem can be below the surface. It can be pretty significant. When we're thinking about new hires, could it be a training issue? Complacency is probably not part of that yet, since they're so new. But there could be a lot of things when it comes to new hires. Maybe we didn't have the follow-up piece, a mentoring program or something to kind of help them through that first year, and they were afraid to ask some of those questions uh, during that initial time before the injury occurred. So we're going to kind of dig through that as we get going here. So at any time, if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and speak up, or you could raise your hand and we might be able to see that. We should be able to see that, right, Sophie?
We should be able to, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So this slide here, what we are looking at is on the x-axis, you'll see we have employee tenure. So to the left hand, we have those employed for 1 year or less. And then as we move to the right, we have our more tenured employees. And I want to point out that this 5 years plus is a big category. That includes every employee who's worked for you for 5 years, for 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. So you can tell that is a very large category there. But what I want to highlight when we look to the left, it really stands out the number of injuries that we've had for those employees who have worked for us for 1 year or less. So that's our new hire group. On the right hand here, we have first year employee claims as a percentage of total. So 2022, we were at 41.6% of the claims that came into Montana State Fund were from those employed for 1 year or less. That is a large percentage. As we move forward in time, right? 2023, we see that drop. 24, we see it drop. In 25, we're at 32.2%, which is better than 41.6, but that's still a high percentage of all of our claims. So like anything, we can always do better. We can always do more work and look at that and figure out how we get that number even smaller.
Well, like Sophie said, when we look at 2025's data, I mean, we're only halfway through the year, so we still have quite a bit of data to add to that. So that number can increase over the next 5 months. This slide is the cost of claims per those years of service. So when we look at those, so employees less than a year tend to cost us a lot more as with the claim payout versus the employees 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, or 4 to 5 years. 5+ years is up there, but it is not as high as the first year employees, which would make sense when we look at that's where a lot of our claims are coming from. So that tells me that those claims are more severe and tend to cost a lot more than those claims with older and more experienced employees.
She's gonna email you on like a form. Trying to remember the name of
And like Sophie was saying, for 2025, we're already at 35% that we've, as far as cost goes. But again, this can increase. So we are below that 43.2% total cost that we had back in 2022, but we still have 5 months left. So it will be interesting to see if we stay lower like we have been in 2023 and 2024, or if that cost does rise. And then this one, we go into the loss events. So the causes of those claims, and this is all focused on those first year employees. So when we're looking at this data, kind of think about the employees within your group and where those injuries are occurring. Uh, do they fall into these categories? So slips, trips, and falls. We know slips, trips, and falls are consistent with being the number one cause of claims for us, even with the older groups of employees, not just with 1 year or less of employment. But then we also have manual material handling, struck by object, and then contact with sharp. Those are kind of the top four when it comes to loss cause uh, for those injuries occurring.
Okay, so what is our goal here? Obviously, we want to prepare our workers for the jobs and the tasks that they're going to face. We need to inform them. What are the expectations and what are the expectations when it comes to safety? We want to increase that safety awareness, of course. Our goal is to reduce injuries, but we also need to make sure that our employees understand what their rights are when it comes to the job. Um, the main takeaway really is orientation is more than just a box that you check and send the employee out, right? Orientation needs to be engaging, it needs to be measurable, and it needs to be comprehensive. We really want that this information to stick with them when they go out on the job, they engage with those hazards.
So when we dig into that new employee safety orientation, there should be two different aspects that you guys are covering so you want the organizational health and safety. So how many of you guys have heard of the Montana Safety Culture Act? Uh, Sophie's going to put the link to that in the chat for you guys so you can look at that document. But in Montana, we're required to follow the Montana Safety Culture Act. And so it kind of outlines some safety requirements that your corporation, your company should be doing at the bare minimum. And then you also want the role and employer specific health and safety. So that's your company specific uh, policies that you want to also cover with those employees when they first start.
All right. So, general safety orientation topics. These are things that it's likely your employees have seen before, whether they saw it at, their first job in high school or, their prior employer. However, it is important to go over them again at your site, right? So things like worker rights, company safety rules and policies. This is a little bit more specific to you, to your business, your operations, right? Basic safety and health information. When these new hires come in, you don't necessarily know what their background is, how thorough their prior employer was, what their experience is with just basic safety and health practices. So even though it may feel repetitive, we've got to go through it, right? Emergency procedures, again, that's site specific. What do they do? Who do they call? Where's the muster point? All of those things are important to touch on with those employees. Work hazards, of course. Personal protective equipment is important. Also specific to your place of employment, your exposures, right? Injury and illness reporting programs. How do they do it? What do they do? That's important. We'll go over that in more detail. Contact information. Who do they call if something goes south? Who do they call if they have a question? What do they do if they are injured? Who do they call, right? And then, of course, that job specific training, which again, we'll go over this in further detail here as we proceed through the training.
So how many of you guys have seen this poster? Anybody? Sophie has. How many have actually read what is on the poster? Usually you've probably seen it. Employees tend not to read as much. Uh, but when we look at this poster, so this should be posted in your guys' workplace, and it covers your rights. So your rights as an employee and your rights, the rights of the employer. So you're supposed to have a safe workplace. If you have a safety hazard concern or a safety concern, you should be able to bring that up, receive information and training on the job for those hazards and how to mitigate those. You could request an OSHA inspection, participate if they show up. You could participate in that inspection. You have the right to file a complaint. You can see those citations that were issued from those inspections. And then you have the right to request any medical records or tests, or if they did sampling to determine if a hazard existed in the workplace, you have a right to those as well. And then the employers must provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. So again, if they know a hazard exists, they need to do something about it. Uh, and sometimes I feel like employers might not know a certain hazard exists if some of their employees don't bring up that hazard, right? So if you see something, you definitely want to bring it to your supervisor's attention, to management's attention so that they can address that. And then they have to comply with OSHA standards depending on their specific standards, depending on what industry you're in. So they have to make sure they're complying with those. If there is a workplace fatality, they have to notify OSHA within 8 hours. If there's a hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, the requirement is within 24 hours. They need to notify OSHA. And then again, they have to provide training to all of their workers and make sure it's in a language that everyone can understand. And then again, this poster needs to be displayed. Um, and then if once those citation, if they receive any citations, they need to fix those and also post those citations. And then you can also request on-site consultation services through OSHA. And then Department of Labor also does on-site consultation. And we are also here to help you with any consultation services as well, uh, if you're one of our policyholders.
Yeah. So general orientation, the basic health and safety processes. What are we talking about here? As you saw in the slide earlier, where we looked at the loss event descriptions of like, how are these new hires getting hurt? Material handling was a big one. That's pushing, pulling, right? Using the force of the body. Most tasks that we do require some sort of force exerted by our body, right? So do we train those new hires on manual material handling, the safe way to use your body when you're out on the task, right? That's really important. Ergonomics. A lot of us think because we have office workers that, oh, their risks are small. We really don't need to do a big onboarding because they're sitting at a desk, they're relatively safe. We don't worry about it. However, there are exposures for those employees as well, and ergonomics is a big one. So even our desk workers, even our employees who are sedentary, we need to talk to them about the proper way to set up their desk space, how far their monitors should be from, when they're seated, the angle of their monitors, how their chair is set up. This is all really important stuff that, in my experience, is often overlooked until the employee's been in that role for 5, 6 years, and all of a sudden now, they have pain in their shoulder. We want to address that immediately, right? Housekeeping is a big one. OSHA has a housekeeping standard, but beyond just the compliance side, we want to make sure that people are comfortable and safe in their space. So we're looking at things like walking and working surfaces. We're making sure things are put away, making sure that those new hires understand what our expectations are when it comes to housekeeping. Again, you don't know what you're inheriting when you hire that employee. They may have come from a business where housekeeping was not important. So at the end of their day, they may leave their tools out. They may leave extension cords across the floor. They may leave their desk a mess with garbage on the floor. Who knows, right? So making sure that those expectations are clear, concise, and that they understand them when it comes to the housekeeping portion of that. Slips, trips, and falls awareness. It does not matter who I am working with, and we work with a wide range of businesses throughout the state. Slips, trips, and falls is always up there as either the first or the second loss driver for that business. So I cannot stress enough how important it is to talk to those new hires about slips, trips, and falls awareness. It seems like a small thing. It seems like an obvious thing. However, we get an exorbitant number of claims for slips, trips, and falls. So it's really worth your time to talk to that new hire about, again, what your expectations are when it comes to slips, trips, and falls awareness. What footwear should they wear? Who is responsible for de-icing the walk? If they show up first, is it them or are we waiting for maintenance? What does that look like, right? We need to make sure that we address that with those new hires. And then lastly, here we have this hazard communication. So safety data sheets. Where are they located? Who's responsible for updating them? What do we do if you do get an exposure to a chemical? What are the expectations around that program, right? It's really easy to overlook these items when it comes to new hire. However, so important that we spend a second touching base with that new hire, going over this stuff, making sure that they understand what we as the employer are expecting of them and requiring of them, and answering any questions. Sometimes new hires don't have the same onboarding experience with their prior employer that they may have with us. So that may raise some questions. Take the time, address them, answer them, go through these topics with them, make sure it's clear. Very, very important. And it sets the stage for that employee. As they come to your business, they learn, how you work, what your expectations are. Going over this day one lets them know, hey, we do require this stuff. We do pay attention to this stuff, and it is important to us. So as they start their career with you, they understand that. It's very helpful.
PPE, also known as personal protective equipment. So when we are picking what type of PPE is required for certain tasks, the first thing we should be doing before we put our employees in any personal protective equipment, we should look at the hierarchy of controls. Uh, some of you might have seen this, some might not have, but this upside down triangle is the hierarchy of controls. So the first thing we want to do when we're determining what type of PPE for a certain task, uh, we want to see, can we eliminate that? Can we eliminate this task, or can we eliminate the process so we do not have to put our employees in personal protective equipment? If we can't eliminate it, we want to see if we could substitute it. Is there some type of maybe it's a chemical. Are we using a certain chemical that is more hazardous? Can we find a substitution that's less hazardous and our employees don't need to wear as much personal protective equipment? when using that uh, chemical. If we're unable to use substitution, then we want to try to engineer it out. So let's think about noise. Can we engineer out the noise? Can we put sound dampening equipment around that piece of equipment to lower the amount of sound coming from it? Can we do some other type of engineering control? If we're unable to engineer it out, um, maybe we need to do an administrative type control where we have standard operating procedures. Our Sophie's only allowed to work in that area for 1 hour during her 8 hour shift. We do some type of administrative control. Uh, and then PPE is the last thing. So you want to think of it as the last resort. Uh, but sometimes it also we might have some substitution and engineering controls in place, but we also need to use PPE. So, but you just don't want to go to PPE first. You want to try to uh, go through these controls before we just start at the personal protective equipment. And then also when we um, give our employees new PPE, what do we need to do? We need to make sure that they know how to don and doff that equipment properly. They know how to store it. They know the limitations of that PPE. Uh, and then if there is damage or something occurs with their personal protective equipment, that they know who to contact, who to go to and get new personal protective equipment uh, so that they're not going without.
Okay, so continuing with the general orientation, injury and illness reporting. How many of you cover this with your new hires? Day one, or maybe two. I see a lot of gaps here, honestly, when I'm working with employers. Oftentimes we wait to address this until there is a claim, until someone is injured. And that's too late. We want to come out the gate and make sure that our employees know when to report an injury, how to report an injury. The last thing we want is for someone to be injured on the job and not say anything for 5, 6, 7, 10 days, and then they finally report it, right? So how do we do that? First of all, it's very helpful if you have your procedures written out somewhere. Then the employee has it. We all know that feeling when you start a new job and you're drinking from the fire hose and you're getting a ton of information, and a week goes by and you're finally, in the job. You feel like you have your feet on the ground. You're doing something, and you don't remember really some of the office stuff or the paperwork stuff, but having a document that you can go back to and reference is really helpful for that, right? So we need to go over those procedures. How do they do it? And one of the big pitfalls that I see often working with employers is we have the injured employee contact their supervisor if they're injured, and that's wonderful. But what happens if that supervisor's on vacation for a week and that employee gets injured? I've seen lots of businesses where they don't have a plan B, and now we see a big lag between the time that the employee was injured and when it was reported. And the lag happened because that supervisor was gone for the week and the employee didn't know who else to call, so they waited until that supervisor came back. And that's too long, right? We need that employee to report right away. And on that note, what is the time frame? What's the expectation when it comes to injuries and reporting time frames? Do you want that employee to let you know as soon as possible, by the end of
It
shift,
shouldn't be a big deal, just 2 appointments.
by by the end of the work week? What are your expectations there? What does that look like? So my recommendation would be that when an employee is injured, they let their supervisor or whoever they're supposed to notify, they let them know as soon as possible by the end of shift at the latest, right? We want to know immediately. So make sure that those are clear, written, that the employees understand it. At Montana State Fund, we have what's called our grab and go kits. You can find them on our website, which is safemt.com. If you need help finding that, let me know after the training, Ayla or myself, and we can direct you there and walk you through that process. But we do have everything that you need to report an injury in a nice grab and go kit or an envelope. It just simplifies the process for you as the employer, but also for that employee where everything is in one spot. They have everything that they need right there. So again, on the injury and illness reporting, everybody has a return to work program, I sure hope. If you don't, again, reach out. We're happy to help you develop that and get it into play at your business. But communicating those expectations with an employee prior to an incident is very, very important. Making sure that they understand when you get injured, this is what's expected of you and this is what's going to happen. We don't want you to sit at home for weeks and weeks with no contact, right? We want you to come back to work. We want to call you. We want that communication to be open so that we can bring you back as soon as we can, have you being productive. We've seen a lot when it comes to employee well-being that getting them back to work helps them heal faster. It helps with our mental health after an injury. It helps us retain good employees, which anymore is a big deal. And then it also helps the employer eliminate fraud when it comes to claims. So it's a wonderful program. If you need help, you need assistance, please reach out. We're happy to get that rocking and rolling on your job sites. And then please check out that safemt.com for our grab and go kits and more information on all of this.
I put that link in the chat if you guys
awesome.
want to view those. So we're going to continue with the general orientation. So the contact information, as Sophie was talking about on who to contact if an employee is or a supervisor is out, you want your employees to know all modes of contact, right? So who to contact if there's hazards, not just injuries. Is it the supervisor? Do they go to the safety committee? Do they go to HR? Do you have a safety person? Make sure that they know all routes of contact and who they need to be contacting when those hazards or safety questions or problems occur. And then you could also have a list of all those contact information and put those in a break room in an area where they're maybe grabbing lunch, those more frequent visited areas for those employees so that they remember. Because like Sophie was saying, when we first start at a company and we get a bunch of different information, and usually we have a bunch of paperwork and maybe that's in there. But sometimes we don't go back through it after we started and we might have misplaced some of that information. So it's good to have it in their area so that oh yeah, that's who I contact. I can contact Sophie if I have a safety question.
All right, so transitioning to our job specific orientation. Oops. Most of the time this is taught or trained on by a supervisor or a direct manager. Sometimes we have HR and they handle most of the general orientation. However, when it comes to job specific, typically we're looking for someone on site familiar with the work, available and present there wherever that employee is going to be working. I cannot stress this enough. This must be completed prior to the exposure of the hazard. Probably the biggest pitfall that I see is folks say, we'll do on-the-job training, which is a valid way of training. However, we still need to brief those employees prior to their boots on the ground and exposure to that hazard. So very, very important when we're talking about job-specific orientation. We need to have that face time with the employee prior to exposure to the hazard.
So here is some of those job-specific trainings that Sophie's talking about. So when we consider the hazards, so again, this isn't going to apply to every company, every industry. You want to, if you have it, you need to make sure that you're training on this prior to them being exposed. So, HAZCOM, are they working with chemicals? They need to be able to know what chemicals, what hazards associated with those chemicals, how to properly protect themselves from those chemicals prior to using them. So make sure you go through that if you have uh, that hazard. Machine guarding, the same thing. You want to make sure that they know how, make sure that equipment's guarded and that the guards are in place prior to using that piece of equipment. And then lockout, tagout, are they affected? Are they authorized? There's different types of trainings when it comes to lockout, tagout. So you want to make sure that you identify those folks and you train them accordingly. And then respiratory protection. Can we just put people in respiratory protection? No, there's a whole process when it comes to respiratory protection that we need to have in place prior to putting them in a respirator. So you want to make sure that you go through that. And if you need help with any of these, you can contact us and we can walk you through that. And then hearing conservation. Do you have a hearing conservation program? Are your employees being exposed to loud noise for continuous amount of time during the workday? Uh, Maybe you need to do some sampling to determine if you need a hearing conservation program. And then confined spaces. Are your employees entering confined spaces? If they are, there's specific training when it comes to that. Bloodborne pathogens, the same thing. Is there an exposure out there? If they're being exposed, that's one of the trainings that everyone should go through. And then powered industrial trucks. You guys have forklifts. There's certain requirements when it comes to powered industrial trucks that you need to follow, and the employee needs to be trained prior to using that forklift on the site. Even if they have training from previous jobs, it needs to be your specific training that they go through in order to operate that equipment. So if they show you that they have a certification, that doesn't really matter. You need to have your own certification program for your forklifts. And then fall protection. Are you just handing out fall protection? Your employees, do they know how to don that fall protection properly? Use it, know the limitations of that equipment. Because there's some projects that maybe a fall arrest system is not the best system to have in place, depending on the hazard. So having those discussions and those trainings prior to those jobs also. And then some job hazard training. So do you guys do JSA, JHA prior to those jobs? Um, I know when I used to work in the Bakken, we would do a JSA every morning on that task that we had for the day. The crew would have to go through and do a JSA, identify the hazards, identify how they're going to mitigate those hazards prior to starting that job. And then here's the on-the-job training that Sophie was talking about. Sometimes you do want somebody to mentor them throughout um, the new hire process for a certain period of time. Um, and they get some of that on the job training. But again, you want to train them on those hazards and everything prior to them just being out there on the job.
Okay, so job specific personal protective equipment. So Ayla went over the basics of, where do you get it? What do you do if yours is damaged? How do you clean it? The general PPE awareness portion. This is job specific. So this is on the site, you're going to be exposed to whatever that hazard might be. How do we know that we have the right PPE, right? We need to go over again how and when to wear that personal protective equipment. Talking about care and management, I've walked into a number of businesses where respiratory protection is required, and they followed every single step. They have an airtight program, and I walk into the shop and there's a respirator out in the open, full of dust. Right? So this is stuff that we need to cover. How do we properly store it? When are they to clean it? How are they to clean it? What do they do? And I'm picking on respiratory protection here because it's easy, but what do they do if their cartridges are full? Where do they get new cartridges? How do they dispose of the old ones, right? We need to go over all of this stuff. We do have a PPE assessment, hazard assessment form that we can share with you all. If you're questioning, do we have the right PPE? Does it cover what we need it to cover? How do we make sure that we're covering our bases there? So we do have that form available. We can send it to you all after this. Just how to conduct a PPE hazard assessment, what to do. And then once you get that hazard assessment completed, if you do need to make any tweaks, maybe you don't have the right respirator, maybe you need different gloves, right? And you have questions of which gloves should I use? We're happy to help you again there, figuring out what's appropriate, what covers your bases in terms of that exposure, and then just how to source that, how to find that.
So what do we do when we complete that job specific training? We want to make sure that we're communicating with HR. The supervisor should maintain those training documents during that course of time for that new hire. Once they are completed, you want to make sure you turn it in. You can do the training and not document it. Did we actually do the training? We have no proof, right? So you want to make sure that you document all those trainings that you complete, have the employee sign off, we have example forms if you guys need it, but if you guys have a training documentation form, just utilize that. But you want to make sure that they're filling out that to make sure that the employee signed off that yes, I was aware of the hazard. I know how to mitigate this. I have the correct PPE. I know how to don and doff that. Whatever the specific job specific trainings that we talked about that you need that they went through, and turn that into your HR department so that they can document it. You can take a copy and keep it for if you are out in the shop, have your own training files or whatever whatever you guys do for your departments are for your company, follow those policies, but you want to make sure that you have that documentation because if you don't document it, it didn't happen.
Okay, job-specific orientation pitfalls. These are things that we have seen, at a number of places, and they kind of hinder our new hire orientation training, what we're trying to get done here. So the first one is the supervisor or the manager time. So do you ensure that the supervisor or lead worker, whoever that is, that's onboarding that employee, has the appropriate time to complete that job-specific training with the employee? Oftentimes it's easy to say, hey, that supervisor has this new hire and he's going to get done what he needs to get done. But how do you onboard a new employee while also doing your 40 or 50 hour a week job tasks? We have to somehow lighten that load so they have the appropriate time to dedicate to that new hire, right? That's important. You need the worker immediately. I get it. You hire that person and the work doesn't stop, it doesn't slow down. You need to get things done. New hires here, put them to work, right? But is it appropriate, let's say for a roofing operation, you need that person on the roof. Day one, you put them up there. Is that appropriate? We've skipped steps, right? They are now in the hazard without that training. We cannot do that, right? So they must have that hazard specific training again prior to being exposed to whatever the hazard is. It's really tempting, especially like I said, production doesn't slow down. You have this worker, get them on the floor and put them to work. We have to pause. There is a process before that worker goes out. we need to spend some time with them going over the hazards, what they're going to be exposed to, right? So the next one, this on-the-job training or this job shadowing. So I see this a lot too. We hired him or her and they're going through on-the-job training. They're out on the floor, they're job shadowing. It's covered, right? That is a way to do it. However, again, we have to have those communications with that new hire prior to putting them on the floor, prior to having them exposed to those hazards, right? We cannot skip those steps. On the job training or the job shadowing they're both excellent programs for onboarding new hires. But that training still needs to happen. So when you do the on the job or the job shadowing, oftentimes you're putting them with an employee and saying, hey, here's so and so, they're new. Take them out for the day. But do we ever pause and say, wow, how experienced or how trained is that employee that I just put my new hire with? Maybe it's someone who's only been there a year. Would that be appropriate? Maybe not ideal. We need to look at that trainer. How experienced are they? Do we trust them? Do they cut corners occasionally? Are they the right person to be onboarding this new hire? Sometimes we have employees and they're wonderful, they're excellent, they do everything the right way, but they want nothing to do with onboarding a new hire. And that's going to affect how that new hire experiences their first, few days at that job site. You may have somebody who loves it, who loves bringing on new employees. They like getting to know folks and kind of taking somebody under their wing and starting the job with them. That's really who we would want in that role. As long as they have a good background when it comes to safety, they know the tasks, the processes, they enjoy it, right? They want somebody with them. They want to train somebody. Those are all things that we're looking at, right? But for you on your job site, you can identify or kind of set limits, like what are those parameters for our trainers, for our lead employees? What do we want to see out of it? What are we requiring of them? What are the parameters, right? You get to set those. And then lastly, undocumented training never happened. Clear as day, right? If it's not written down, if it's not documented somewhere, it never happened. So we have to make sure that we document all of that training. If you have copies of it and you send some to HR and you have some on site, even better, right? I would rather you over document all of this and we know it happened tenfold over, right? Than not documenting it at all. If that's the case, then it didn't happen.
So again, more on the documentation. There's a theme here, right? If we didn't document it, like Sophie said, it didn't happen. So you want to make sure you document both the orientation process and the task specific. So all of your policies that you go over is documented. And then you want to make sure that you check back with the employee to ensure that they understand those safety expectations. So do follow-ups. Are we following up with an employee? Maybe it's in a couple weeks at first, every couple weeks. Maybe it's monthly. And then just keep pushing it out. Maybe it's 2 months after that. Whatever your process is, but you want to make sure you follow up and come back and have them talk to you about those safety expectations, are those policies, and see if they understand and all those expectations. Because again, sometimes we are overloaded when we first start at a company and we might not ask some of the questions that maybe we thought we should have because we didn't realize or we were too scared to ask at that point. So just follow up with them. Maybe do a refresher. Is it an annual refresher? Is it maybe it's every 6 months? Whatever the you guys decide for your company. Again, there's specific standards that have certain requirements when it comes to some of that job specific orientation and the training process, how often you should, but again, you could go above and beyond what OSHA requires as well.